And certainly when it comes up into more recent history, you mentioned miracles. The thing that is central for me is the fact that what you call petty, and I feel is vastly significant, because it's touching on something that affects every human being, the question of death. Now, if Jesus really literally rose from the dead as a matter of history, that makes an enormous difference to our view of the world. And so far from being petty, if this is God speaking to us, then I want to take it extremely seriously. Why do you think it's so petty?
Well, of course it makes a huge difference if it's true. But
yes, exactly.
But you've suddenly leapt from sophisticated discussions of the origin of the universe, where one can have a proper discussion about whether some sort of cosmic intelligence could have set forth the laws of physics. And you suddenly jump to a man who lived 2,000 years ago, was born of a virgin, rose again from the dead.
Well, I only did that because you mentioned it first at the beginning.
I think that's petty. By comparison with the grandeur of the universe. I mean, to put my point again, do you really think that the creator of this magnificent edifice of the universe, the expanding universe, the galaxies, he really couldn't think of a better way to get rid of the sins on this one little speck of dust than to have himself tortured? He's the one who's doing the forgiving after all. Couldn't he just have forgiven? Because
this is a moral universe, Richard, and just forgiving doesn't make sense.
I mean, he has to kill himself in order to...
He doesn't kill himself.
Or get himself killed, tortured.
God sends his Son into the world to provide forgiveness and to provide a basis on which he can justly bring forgiveness to me. Now,
he has to get himself killed in order to do that.
Well, half a minute. We need to step back from this a little bit because it's actually a highly relevant topic. In your world, where is justice to be found?
Well, justice is a human construct of great importance in human affairs, and it's something that most of us have a sense of, which I think probably can be given some sort of Darwinian explanation, but I don't see where you're taking this.
Well, my question is there any ultimate justice? You see, you say this is petty. I'm saying I find myself in a world which is a broken world. I find myself in a world where there's massive injustice, where many people won't get it. We're so privileged. We live in Oxford and so on. We've got enough money to live on, etc., etc. But if there is no God, then there's no ultimate justice. And one of the things that the resurrection transforms for me from pettiness right into center stage is, if this is true, then there's real hope that there'll be a rational evaluation and fair justice at the end of the world. But atheism doesn't give you that.
Okay, suppose there is no hope, suppose there is no justice, suppose there's nothing but misery and darkness and bleakness, suppose there is nothing that we would wish for, nothing that we would hope for. Too bad. That doesn't make it true just because God would make us feel good.
Well, of course it doesn't.
Well, then why do you bring that argument up?
Because I believe that there is evidence that it is true. I don't believe in the resurrection just like that, because faith is based on evidence.
You've changed your ground again. What you said before was that there is no hope without God. And it sounded
well, that's true. That's absolutely true. Okay. And you just admitted it.
I haven't admitted it. I said, if that's true,
yes.
So what? I didn't say it was true. But anyway,
but therefore the question to be decided then is there a God, and has he revealed himself? And that's where, again, I think this pettiness needs to be pushed aside, because I can't get to know you as a person. You're not just a scientific object. I could look at you through a telescope or a magnifying glass. I could even dissect you and so on and so forth. But because you are a person, I cannot get to know you unless you're prepared to reveal yourself to me. So the fact that the claim of Christ to be the truth, to be God incarnate, that makes perfect sense to me, because if there is a God who invented this wonderful, marvelous universe with all its science and all the rest, then he has taken the initiative in getting to know us and revealing himself to us. And he's revealed himself to us at the level we can understand. We're persons, he's a person. That at least makes sense. So one of the very important questions to ask is that really true? Or is this simply myth and fantasy?
Well, myth and fantasy for me.
Yeah, well, do you know, that disturbs me for the following reason. Reading your book, The God Delusion, you say that it's under scholarly dispute among historians that Jesus actually existed. Now, I checked with the ancient historians. That is not so. And it disturbed me. History is not natural science. But what I don't understand is this, why you would write something like that.
I don't think it's a very important question whether Jesus existed. There are some historians, most historians think he did, some
They
historians
certainly
don't.
do. I couldn't find an ancient historian that didn't.
Well, there are one or two, but I don't really care, actually, because precisely because it's petty. I mean, if you could possibly persuade me that there was some kind of creative force in the universe, there was some kind of physical, mathematical genius who created everything, the expanding universe, devised quantum theory, relativity, and all that. You could possibly persuade me of that. But that is radically and fundamentally incompatible with the sort of God who cares about sin, the sort of God who cares about what you do with your genitals, the sort of God who is interested, who has the slightest interest in your private thoughts and wickednesses and things like that. Surely you can see that a God who's grand enough to make the universe is not going to give a tuppenny cuss about what you're thinking about and your sins and things like that.
So you think that morality is not important?
Of course I don't think morality is not important. I'm a human being.
Sounds like you're saying it isn't important.
I'm a human being, and I live in a society of human beings, and within a society of human beings, morality is of course important. But we are one of billions of planets on a huge scale, and a cosmic God who bothers about this kind of human scale is not the kind of God that is compatible with a scientific view of the universe. It's a medieval view.
But do you think that size is the measure of importance? Incidentally, on a logarithmic scale, you're about halfway between the atom and the universe. So if God thinks in terms of logarithms, your point falls, I think.
I mean, this is in a sense an emotional argument we've come into now. And
I don't think so at all.
If I were going to respect a God, it would be the kind of God the sort of God that Carl Sagan might have worshipped, not the sort of medieval God who fusses about sin, the obsession with sin and righteousness and sort of, I keep coming back to this word petty, and I stand by it.
Well, it's an image of God that I find strange in a way. I gather from the BBC today that you're promoting some advert on London buses, which is going to say something like, there probably is no God, so don't worry and enjoy your life. Now, I was very interested in that. Why don't worry? Do you associate the idea of God with worrying?
I fought for a better slogan than that. This was something that was devised by a woman on the Guardian, and she wanted to raise money from £5 here, £5 there to put this advertisement on the London buses. I offered to match donations, and I said I'd rather change the slogan from there probably is no God to there almost certainly is no God. And I didn't want to say don't worry and enjoy your life. I wanted to say something like live your life to the full. But it was too late to change it, and I'm since the money has been raised in the first day, something like £23,000 had already been raised, and she was only hoping for 5,500. I'm going to get some say in what the next slogan is, and it's not going to say what the present one does.
But from where I sit, you see, the thing that my relationship with God is the very thing that stops the worry and gives me the fullness of life. And we're back to the pettiness, because if God is real and has revealed himself, then it's through a relationship with him that we really can enjoy a full life, science included.
I find that so unconvincing.
Yeah.
I think there's something wonderful about standing up and facing up to a universe where we are increasing our understanding, and we throw away childhood obsessions, we throw away the sort of imaginary friend that comforts us when we're children, and we feel the need for some kind of parent figure to turn to. I think when we grow up, we need to cast that aside and stand up tall in the universe, and it's cold and we're not going to last for it. We're going to die, and we face up to that. And I think that's a nobler way of getting through life than to pin your hopes on childhood illusions.
But that all rests on the assumption that there's no God and they're childhood delusions.
Yes, well, we have
but
to
I
look
could
at the
invert
evidence.
that. That's a typical Freudian explanation, but one's atheism could be exactly that. A flight away from the reality that there is a God. So we're back to the question, inevitably.
We need the evidence.
We need the evidence. And what I'm suggesting to you is that we do have evidence. We have it in science, part of God's revelation. And I believe this building was probably dedicated to the glory of God.
No, it wasn't actually.
Wasn't it?
No.
Oh, right. Okay.
Rather the reverse.
Well, Oxford University, where we
That's
get
going back a few centuries
yes,
there.
The Lord is my light and my illumination is the base of it. And there was that wholeness of life. And it seems to me that by truncating everything and putting it into the science basket, so to speak, that I get the impression that you're not taking history really seriously. Otherwise, you'd interact with it. And I'm trying to get to the basis of why that is so, because you regard what Jesus has done and who he is as petty. And I find the contrast between standing tall in a silent and cold universe with no hope, believing that your moral sense must ultimately be illusion. You're crying for justice because most people will never get it, because death ends everything. The contrast between that and enjoying the friendship, the personal friendship of God, and knowing that ultimate justice will be done, is immense.
Well,
but the basic question is it true or not?
Yeah, that is the basic question. It is completely irrelevant if it's comforting, if it gives you hope, if it gives you happiness. That has nothing to do with whether it's true.
That I agree with entirely.
So we need to know whether it's true.
Yes.
Now, when you look at history, and let's leave aside, maybe I alluded to the possibility that some historians think Jesus never existed. I take that back. Jesus existed. However, if you're going to say that Jesus was born of a virgin, that Jesus walked on water, that he turned water into wine, that is palpably anti-scientific. There is no evidence for that. And if there were, you would be, well, I mean, no, there simply isn't any evidence for that, and no scientist could possibly take the idea seriously.
I can make it worse for you.
I know you can.
Because Jesus actually claimed to be the Logos that created the whole universe. And if this is the Creator incarnate, making water into wine and so on is really a triviality. The more fundamental thing is the fact that he claimed to be and gave evidence that he was God. When you say it's anti-scientific, I don't think it's anti-scientific at all. Science cannot say that miracles do not occur. It can say they're highly improbable. But nobody is claiming that these things occurred by natural processes. They occurred because God fed his power in. Nor did the whole universe if we look at it, occur in that sense by natural processes. God created it. We study all the natural processes within it. So when you say it's anti-scientific, I think it's not anti-scientific.
What I mean by that is that if, and when doing science, we constantly have to keep in mind that at any moment there might be a little magic trick slipped in. That would completely nullify the whole enterprise of science.
Oh, I agree with that. But
well,
you see,
but that's what you're allowing then.
No, I'm not allowing that at all, because in order to recognize what the New Testament calls miracle, a special act of God, you must be living in a universe that has regularities and that we recognize them. I agree with you entirely.
Otherwise you wouldn't notice the miracles.
That's exactly true. You wouldn't recognize if dead people were popping up all over the place. You wouldn't think it was very special. But the fact is you need two things, not one. You've got to have regularities which we call the laws of nature, although they're not causes. They're, in a sense, descriptions that we can use. You also need to be able to recognize those so that, for example, when Joseph discovered that his wife-to-be Mary was pregnant, he simply didn't believe her story. He was going to divorce her. He knew exactly where babies came from. He knew the regularity. It took very special convincing for him to realize that something extremely special had happened. But science cannot stop that. The question is, of course, did such a thing ever happen? And the central focus in the New Testament is not that, which is not so readily accessible to evidence, the virgin conception, but the resurrection of Christ. And ancient historians, and it's fascinated me recently going over it, ancient historians whose discipline is very venerable, and I'm not talking about Christian ancient historians, ancient historians, many of them, even at the skeptical end of the spectrum, say that the evidence for the resurrection of Christ is very powerful. The explosion of the Christian church from a non-proselytizing group of Jews in the first century, the empty tomb and all the rest of it, has even led Geza Vermesh, who's one of the most distinguished ancient historians in Oxford, to say, yes, this tomb was empty, and hallucinations and this kind of explanation do not wash. So we have to ask ourselves, are we prepared to believe in historical testimony or not?
Well, you must talk to different historians than the one I talk to, than the ones I talk to. But in any case, I still come back to the point that you cannot do science if at any time you remember that famous cartoon of the...
Oh, I do. And therefore a miracle happens in the middle of the equation. Yes.
I mean, that is deeply against the spirit of science. And I don't think I could do science if I thought that at any time something like the resurrection, something like the virgin birth was going to be smuggled in by a godly caprice.
Let me stop you right there, gentlemen. We need now to move on to the last topic, and we haven't left ourselves a great deal of time here, and that's the issue of meaning, human life, and meaning and purpose and morality. You've kind of touched on morality just a bit, but it was only briefly. So let's move the conversation there, and then we'll have our Q&A.
He's brought us to a complete stop, hasn't he?
The T-Rex is warming up.
Yeah.
Well, we have talked a bit about
we have
morality.
talked a bit about meaning too, haven't we, really?